April 1945. Berlin collapses under Soviet fire. The official story tells us that on April 30th, Adolf Hitler took his own life in his bunker alongside Eva Braun. Their bodies were burned beyond recognition. But what if that account was the greatest cover-up of the 20th century? Recently declassified FBI documents reveal that J. Edgar Hoover himself actively investigated the possibility that Hitler escaped to Argentina. What you're about to hear challenges everything you thought you knew. Hoover's aide, Director, we have a report from our agent in Buenos Aires. A witness claims to have seen Hitler arrive by submarine. Hoover, follow that lead. Leave nothing out. For decades, we've been told that the mastermind of the Third Reich died like a cornered rat. But forensic evidence, secret files, and testimonies from Patagonia tell a very different story. A story of escape, protection, and silence. It all begins with a simple question. If he truly committed suicide in the bunker, why did the most important physical evidence turn out to be false 64 years later? May 1945. Berlin lies in ruins. The official narrative rests on the testimonies of Hitler's bodyguards like Otto Günscher, who claimed to have carried out and burned the bodies. But Soviet reports from that same year reveal crucial inconsistencies. Marshal Zhukov, commander of the Soviet forces in Berlin, declared in June 1945, "We have not identified Hitler's body. He could have escaped at the last moment." British intelligence, the MI6, kept secret files speculating that Hitler might have used a double. In fact, several bodies resembling the Führer were found around the bunker. The international press of the time echoed the uncertainty. The Chicago Times ran the headline, "Hitler may be alive in Argentina." The suicide story was convenient for everyone. For the Soviets, it symbolized total victory over Nazism. For the Western Allies, it avoided a trial that might have unearthed uncomfortable secrets. And for the fugitive Nazis, it was the perfect cover to protect their leader. British historian Hugh Trevor Roper, appointed by MI6 to investigate the death, summed it up years later with unsettling clarity. The evidence is so confusing that doubt will always remain. If you were an Allied leader in 1945, would you prefer a dead and unverifiable Hitler or a living Hitler who had simply vanished? The answer, as always, depends on who writes the history. But the greatest doubt would emerge 6 decades later, from a forensic laboratory in Connecticut. For 64 years, Russia displayed a fragment of a skull with a bullet hole as the ultimate proof of Hitler's suicide. It was the centerpiece of the Soviet narrative, exhibited in museums and cited in history books as irrefutable evidence. But in the year 2009, everything changed. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Nick Bellantoni from the University of Connecticut was invited to examine the remains kept in Moscow. What she discovered sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Dr. Bellantoni, I immediately noticed that the cranial suture didn't match that of a 56-year-old man. It was too young. I requested a DNA analysis. The results were conclusive. The skull belonged to a woman between 20 and 40 years old. Carbon dating confirmed she died around 1945. But she was not Eva Braun, whose own fate remains uncertain. So, whose skull was it? And why did the Soviets present it for decades as proof of Hitler's death? The findings shattered the most solid foundation of the official story. Without the skull, the version of the gunshot to the head was left without basis. The historical community was forced to reconsider the entire case. Researchers began to re-examine the remaining evidence. The photographs, the supposed witnesses, the medical reports. And every document from the Soviet archives seemed to raise more questions than answers. Was it a genuine mistake? Or a political maneuver to reinforce the Soviet narrative of victory? What's certain is that Bellantoni's discovery opened a new chapter, one where science dismantled a story built over generations. But while the skull crumbled as proof, one last piece of evidence was still being defended by skeptics: the teeth. The dental fragment that, according to the Soviets, belonged to Hitler. And that piece of evidence, as forensic experts would soon discover, also carried its own shadows. The only remains that survived relatively intact were a jawbone with dental work and several teeth. These were identified by Cite Heusermann, assistant to Hitler's dentist, Hugo Blaschke. She recognized the distinctive dental bridge and the custom-made crowns. Blaschke himself, captured by the Americans, confirmed the identification. However, there are serious problems with this so-called irrefutable proof. Heusermann was held prisoner by the Soviets for years before making her statement. Blaschke changed his testimony multiple times, and the original dental records of Hitler mysteriously disappeared after the war. Escape theorists argue that Hitler could have ordered several teeth extracted before his supposed death to create misleading evidence. Among spies and secret agents, forging false proofs of death was a known tactic. If the skull was proven false, why couldn't the teeth, or at least their context, be as well? Can official history truly rest on the testimony of prisoners under coercion and on dental evidence with no original records? You decide. While the world accepted the Soviet version across the ocean, one powerful man was conducting his own secret investigation. Declassified FBI files in 2014 reveal an uncomfortable truth. The United States was never fully convinced of Hitler's death. J. Edgar Hoover kept the investigation open for years, following leads from South America. The most revealing report is dated September 21, 1945, just 4 months after Germany's surrender. An FBI informant in Argentina reported that Hitler had arrived in the country 2.5 weeks after the fall of Berlin, traveling by submarine from Spain. The report details that he initially settled on a hacienda near Bariloche, protected by SS officers. Hoover personally wrote in the margin of one of these documents, "This information must be thoroughly investigated." Although many reports were labeled as unreliable, the fact that they were kept in secret files shows that US intelligence considered the escape plausible. Why did Hoover insist on this investigation if the bunker evidence was so conclusive? But if Hitler really escaped, how did he evade the Allied blockade? The answer could lie in 2 submarines that mysteriously appeared in Argentina months after the war. On July 10th and August 17th, 1945, when the war in Europe had been over for months, 2 German submarines, the U-530 and the U-9977, surrendered at the Argentine port of Mar del Plata. Their captain, Otto Wermuth of the U-530, claimed to have been on a secret mission that he could not disclose. Interrogations of the crews, documented in Argentine naval archives, show inconsistencies. The U-530 had destroyed its navigation log and all documents. The submarines displayed signs of having carried additional passengers with modified compartments and extra provisions. The perfect escape route existed, from Germany to the coasts of Spain, then south using favorable currents, reaching the desolate Patagonian shores. The operation was coordinated by the Odessa network, which had already established safe routes for Nazi criminals. Perón's government, sympathetic to the Axis, provided false documentation and protection. If these submarines arrived months later with crews hiding information, what prevented them from transporting high-ranking passengers before surrendering? Argentina not only received mysterious submarines, but actively documented the arrival of Nazis. Its archives tell a story the world ignored. San Carlos de Bariloche in the Argentine Patagonia became the epicenter of Nazi refuge. The Inalco estate, owned by the German businessman Ludwig Freude, advisor to Perón, appears repeatedly in reports as a possible residence of Hitler. Argentine journalist Abel Basti collected testimonies from former employees who described an elderly, thin man with a characteristic mustache living under strict security measures. One of them, an aged gardener, stated, "We were forbidden from approaching the main house. Only the Germans could enter." The location was perfect, surrounded by mountains, accessible only via Lake Nahuel Huapi, with clandestine airstrips nearby. The property belonged to Alejandro Bustillo, an architect known for his Nazi sympathies. Bustillo designed multiple residences for the German community in the area, creating a network of interconnected refuges. Bariloche was not an isolated hideout, but part of a German colony so powerful it functioned as an independent state within Argentina. By 1945, the Argentine Patagonia was home to a German community of more than 50,000 people. Many were fervent Nazis who had arrived before the war. They built their own schools, hospitals, and even German-language newspapers. This state within a state became the perfect shelter for war criminals. Adolf Eichmann lived quietly in Buenos Aires until 1960. Josef Mengele practiced medicine in several Argentine towns. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lion, found refuge in Bolivia with Argentine assistance. The DIFA, Argentina's immigration police, kept records documenting the arrival of Nazis under false identities. These files, partially destroyed during Perón's administration, revealed a pattern. The most wanted criminals arrived with Red Cross passports issued in Italy, then received new identities once in Argentina. With such a well-developed infrastructure to protect Nazis, is it really far-fetched to think that Hitler could have been the most prized guest of all? But if he lived hidden for years, why has no one ever produced definitive photographic proof? The answer leads us to the most controversial analysis of all. The most disturbing theory suggests that the Allied powers allowed, or even facilitated, Hitler's escape. But why? A spectacular trial could have turned him into a martyr and reignited the Nazi movement. Moreover, both sides were eager to seize German scientists and technology. Operation Paperclip brought more than 1,600 Nazi scientists to the United States. The Soviets had their own version, Operation Osoaviakim. In this context, Hitler's escape might have been a tacit agreement. US General George Patton wrote in his diary, "Hitler escaped. I know it." Soviet intelligence maintained the escape theory for years. The KGB actively investigated the Argentine connection until the 1960s. If both sides of the Cold War were pursuing evidence of Hitler's survival, doesn't that suggest his death in the bunker was never fully accepted within their own ranks? Yet the greatest obstacle to the escape theory has always been the photographs. Modern forensic analysis, however, reveals details that went unnoticed for decades. Several photographs have surfaced showing an elderly man resembling Hitler somewhere in South America. The most famous, taken in 1954 in Bahia Blanca, shows a man sitting in a cafe with a striking facial similarity. A digital forensic analysis conducted in 2022 by the Facial Identification Laboratory of the University of Buenos Aires found 22 matching points with Hitler, including the interpupillary distance, ear shape, and nasal proportions. However, skeptics argue that without DNA evidence, such coincidences remain inconclusive. The most intriguing element is the absence of clear photographs. If Hitler truly lived to old age in Argentina, why is there not a single undeniable image? Theorists claim he maintained an extremely low profile, living in isolated estates and avoiding all public exposure. The few existing images remain ambiguous, enough to keep the debate alive. In the age of artificial intelligence, should all these photographs be reanalyzed with modern facial recognition technology? Or are some questions meant to remain unanswered? If we accept the possibility that he survived, one final question becomes inevitable. How and when did he truly meet his end? The theories surrounding Hitler's death in Argentina vary widely. Abel Basti suggests that he died at the Inalco estate around 1962, at the age of 73, of natural causes. His remains, according to this account, were cremated and scattered across the Andes to prevent any possible identification. Another version, coming from former Stasi agents, claims that Hitler lived until 1971 on a ranch near San Carlos de Bariloche, protected by a secret organization known as Die Spinner, the Spider. According to these reports, he died of a heart attack and was buried in an unmarked grave. Declassified Mossad files, obtained by Israeli journalist Ronan Bergman, reveal that the Israeli Secret Service seriously investigated the Argentine leads during the 1960s. However, they ultimately chose not to act, reasoning that an old hidden Hitler no longer posed a threat, and that capturing him could turn him into the martyr they most feared. With all these pieces on the table, only one question remains. Can we ever truly know the truth? Or will the mystery of Hitler forever linger in the shadows of history? The official forensic evidence collapses with a skull that belongs to a woman. The FBI files reveal secret investigations into his escape. The submarine routes exist in historical documents. The refuge in Bariloche is confirmed by local testimonies, and the Allied cover-up remains plausible within the context of the Cold War. But the absence of definitive proof, a clear photograph, identifiable remains, keeps the theory in the realm of possibility rather than certainty. As British historian David Irving once said, Auschwitz is proven by documents and testimonies. Hitler's death in the bunker is not. Perhaps the real question isn't whether Hitler escaped, but why we so desperately need to believe he died in 1945. The answer may lie in our inability to accept that absolute evil might have escaped unpunished. The mystery of Hitler in Argentina confronts us with a chilling possibility: that historical justice sometimes fails, and that some secrets are never fully revealed. This mystery remains open. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment when new declassifications shed light on the shadows of history. And tell us, do you believe the search for truth should continue? Or are some mysteries better left to rest?